My name is Luz Martinez, and I'm a staff attorney at Houston Volunteer Lawyers. Today, we'll be talking about the Advanced Child Tax Credit. Next slide. Our panel includes Frank DePietro, Clinic Director at Prairie State Legal Services, Maria Dooner, Practitioner in Residence at American University Washington College of Law, Kate Liefeld, Management and Program Analyst with the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service, and Christine Spidel, Assistant Professor and Director with the Villanova Federal Tax Clinic. Next slide. Please be sure to include your questions in the chat, and we'll answer those throughout the talk as well as at the end. Our discussion today will cover and highlight issues that taxpayers may encounter with the Advanced Child Tax Credit. We'll cover a high-level overview of the Advanced Child Tax Credit, discuss issues that may lead to a delay in receiving the Advanced Child Tax Credit, as well as logistical issues that taxpayers may encounter in trying to receive the Advanced Child Tax Credit. We'll also discuss whether taxpayers should opt out of the advanced payments and situations that may arise when taxpayers receive the payment but should not have received the payment. We'll have at the end time for discussion any questions you may have. And Frank will start us off with a high-level overview of the Advanced Child Tax Credit. Next slide.
Good afternoon. So the Advanced Child Tax Credit, the payments were created through the American Rescue Plan that was passed in March of 2021. And one of the things which you'll see come up a couple of times, because it's very important, is that it is currently only in effect for tax year 2021. There were changes made to the child tax credit previously, but the current changes that we're going to talk about today, again, are only enacted for tax year 2021. Each qualifying child can be eligible up to $3,600 for a refundable tax credit. And the advance payments, which started in July, are up to $300 per month per qualifying child. Something that is very important is that these payments, as all tax credits are considered general welfare payments by the government. They're not taxable. If someone receives them, it should not affect, it should not be considered in federal support programs such as SNAP, TANF, SSI, or WIC. This is also being copied by numerous state governments as well. So again, the advance payments should not be considered when determining income eligibility for various support programs. The qualifying child credits mostly remain the same. There's a couple of minor changes, which we'll talk about briefly. And it's estimated that 74 million US children meet the requirements to be a qualifying child last year. Next slide, please. So the advance payments, this is the big thing that's going on right now, is that they began on July 15th, and they're going to be issued monthly, approximately on the 15th of each month until December, for a total of 6 advanced child tax credit payments. The IRS has defaulted in that it will be issuing these advance payments. So whether you chose to get them or not, you are going to be getting these advance payments. You can opt out through various portals, and we'll talk about that. Again, also, this does not affect parents' taxable income. They are based on the last filed tax return. If it was either 2019 or 2020, prior year tax returns such as 2018 and prior do not have an effect on the advance payments, determining eligibility or who's entitled to them or what qualifying child can be listed and are eligible for it. It is based on the dependents listed on the tax return. So that is a very key point. To receive the advance payments for a qualifying child, you must have had that child listed on your tax return last year. And the IRS has generated 3 portals, which we'll see briefly, that allow you to see important client information, allow taxpayers to make changes, and they are the Advanced Child Tax Credit Eligibility Assistance, the nonfilers portal, and the Child Tax Credit Update portal. So the IRS has put a lot of time and effort into these. The non-filers portal in particular is based upon the economic impact payments or the stimulus payments portals that were issued last year. And they allow you to see and interact with the IRS without actually having to call the IRS. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresher, what is the child tax credit? And this is what the advanced tax credits are based on. And it is a refundable tax credit for parents who have qualifying children. It is now a fully refundable tax credit. Prior to last year, only certain portions of the child tax credit were refundable. There are numerous requirements. Some have changed this year. The big thing is the relationship test. The child has to be related to you through blood or marriage. A support test where the child cannot have provided more than half of his own financial support. The dependent test, again, we talked about how the child must be claimed as a dependent on a parent's tax return. That's become a little bit of an issue, especially in divorce cases, where the children are often given to the non-custodial parent to be allowed to be claimed as a dependent. The IRS is going to go off previous year returns, so they're going to see that if the dependent was claimed on a prior year by somebody else, that's where the advance payments are going to go, even though that the advance payments count towards this year's child tax credit. There's a citizenship test. The child has to be a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, U.S. resident. And then there is an income test. The parental income, there are phase-outs, but generally the threshold is $150,000. So this is designed as an anti-poverty program. It's not supposed to help those, or the money's not supposed to give them those who do not necessarily need it. There's an age test. As of right now, it is 17 years or younger on December 31st, 2021. This is a change from last year where it was 16 years. So we've gained an extra year here, which helps. And the child just has to be born on the at the end of the year. So a child who was born on December 31st qualifies for the entire tax credit. And then lastly, the residency test. The child has to live with the parent for at least 50% of the year, or a non-custodial parent is granted the dependency exemption, which we talked about. IRS Form 8332 allows the custodial parent to give the non-custodial parent permission to claim the child. Again, that's where we're seeing some issues coming up where odd and even years, certain parents get to claim the child and things of that nature. Again, the IRS doesn't know this, and hopefully portals, as they keep growing, will be able to allow the situation to get fixed. Next slide, please. So again, the amount of tax credit is $3,600 per child under the age of 6 and $3,000 per child under the age of 18. So again, 17 years of age on December 31st, 2021. A very big change is that there is no income requirement or earned income requirement of the parent to be eligible for this tax. So prior to this year, last year, the parent had to have, I believe, $2,500 in earned income. That is no longer the case. Somebody who is on SSI may claim the child and get the entire tax credit where they were not eligible for any of the tax credit last year. So we're talking about $3,600 per child going to needy families that used to not be able to be eligible for it. And again, the tax credit is fully refundable for this year. You're not required to owe income tax like you were in previous years. Next slide, please. So offsets. A lot of people are concerned about whether they should get these advanced, they get the advanced child tax credit payments. Are they offset? And they are not. That's the good thing, is that the payments that are received, if you're eligible for payments from July till December, you will get those payments. They will not be offset against state or federal taxes, any other debts, or child support. This is very good. So the money is going to the people who desperately need it, but you have to be careful because once the funds hit the bank account, they could be garnishable. So while the payments themselves are going to be given once they receive the bank account, if there are some different orders out there, things of that nature, you need to be concerned. So I would suggest advising clients that they need to be aware of this. If there are judgments against them, unless the state laws prohibit it, it could, that money still could come out. So it's not necessarily getting paid by the IRS or taken from the IRS, but taken from the person's bank account. The big concern, though, is it is offset for any amount of the child tax credit that's claimed on the 2021 federal tax return. So next year, you're going to be getting, you're supposed to get half of the tax credit, the child tax credit, as a credit on your tax return next year, plus any of the advance payments you did not receive. So if you didn't receive any of the advanced child tax credit, you'll receive the entire $3,600. Or if you did receive all of it for a child, $1,800 you would have received in advance payments this year, $250 per month, or I'm sorry, $300 per month, and then the remaining $1,800 would go on your tax return. If the advance payments are not received, they will be offset. So this is similar to what happened last year with the economic impact payments, stimulus payments 1 and 2. If you did not receive them by October 15th of last year, you can only claim them on your federal tax return, which you would have filed April 15th of this year. And then they could be offset against all of the other debts that we just talked about, child support, federal, state taxes, student loans. Those payments can be offset. So the key is to make sure the advanced child tax credit, the advance payments are getting to whoever needs them, even if they have tax debts right now, because they will not be able to get this child tax credit after the fact. If they owe tax, that will be used to offset or used to pay their taxes. So it's, again, very important to make sure who's entitled to the child tax credit does receive it. One of the other things too that we're starting to see is that the IRS, I believe, is catching up on the advanced tax credits, where if you did not apply for them for July and you got them in August, I believe you also did receive the July payments. So if you're thinking previous payments, if you missed them, they're not gone. You may still be able to get them. Next slide, please. So a very important thing is the safe harbor provisions. People are concerned that they receive money. Would they have to pay it back? And what if they spend it? How are they going to pay it back? So in the law, there was something known as repayment protection. This is the safe harbor provision. The full amount is $2,000 for each extra child. So if you look at it, the advance payments can total no more than $1,800 per year. So this is going to cover every child that if you're ineligible to receive the payments, you're going to get full protection. The primary factors, though, are going to be income that determines how much of that protection you receive. Just again, going through it, the full repayment protection is $2,000 for each child, times the difference between the number of qualifying children. So if you had 2 children that you should not have received the advanced tax credit, you received $3,600, well, you would actually have $4,000 in repayment protection. So you will not have to pay that back. Again, you can use this to offset any amount of the overpayment, and it's just the way that the government's using to protect people who receive this money, spend it, and then they're afraid they're going to have a large tax bill. Next slide. Again, there's 2 requirements for this income protection. The first is, for the repayment protection. The first is income. Individuals who earn less than $40,000 a year are fully protected, and then there are phase outs between $40,000 to $80,000, which you have to repay some of the money back if you received it in error. And finally, after $80,000 for an individual taxpayer, the repayment protection is phased out completely. Same kind of situation with married couples. Couples filing jointly can earn up to $60,000 who earn up to $60,000 can receive full payment protection with phase outs. 60 to 120, there are some phase outs, and then after 120, there is no protection. And again, same thing with head of household, $50,000 for full repayment protection. Phase outs between $50,000 to $100,000, where you have to pay a portion of the money back if you received it in error, and finally, no protection over $100,000. The other thing, which shouldn't really affect most of our clients, but to get the repayment protection, the taxpayer's main home must also be in the United States for half of 2021. So just something to be aware of. Next slide. I just wanted to show briefly the IRS, the portals that they prepared. The first, the Advanced Child Tax Credit Eligibility Assistance. This is a nice tool to give to clients, and you can just look it up in Google. I'll point you right to the IRS website. It's a nice tool that allows someone to determine if they're eligible for these tax credits without having to put in any identifying information. So we can protect your identity, protect possible tax, tax fraud, things of that nature. Again, no identifying information, just briefly what, if you're eligible, it gives you a quick and dirty look at whether you're eligible or not. The second thing is the nonfilers portal. So we're going to talk about people who are typically disabled on SSI or maybe Social Security. They're taking care of children. They generally don't have to file a tax return. To get these advanced tax credit, they can go through the nonfilers portal. It's done through Free File. It's the same thing that was done with the economic impact payments. That's very similar the way it was created and laid out. And the last is the Child Tax Credit Update Portal. And you can see my name here. Took one for the team and basically put my went in and logged in to see exactly what's going on. And this is you or your clients directly interacting with the IRS. So you can see on the Child Tax Credit Portal, you can look at the eligibility, determine yes, I'm eligible and I'm enrolled in the advance payments. I can find out where the payments were sent and where it's processed, and I can also opt out. So opt out of the advance payments. So the Child Tax Credit Update Portal is where you are directly interacting with the IRS. It's a very good tool. It allows you to avoid mail or phone correspondence with the IRS, which can be extremely difficult right now as people are still trying to get these payments, finding out where they are missing. We've seen with my interactions with the IRS a tremendous amount of hold time just because the volume that they're receiving regarding this and economic impact payments. Next slide, please. So who can use these portals? In particular, child born in 2021, the IRS really just doesn't know about the child. They've never filed a tax return. So you're gonna have to, they haven't even claimed they're dependent on a tax return. So you're gonna have to just file the return. You're not eligible for the advanced tax credit payments. Same thing with taxpayers, possibly who did not qualify in 2020 because of income. You're gonna probably have to wait until 2021. Incarcerated individuals, it's being determined. I'm not sure if Katrina has anything that she'd want to add on either of these two issues as of right now.
I heard that perhaps later in the year, children who are born in 2021, the parents will be able to update the portal, but I don't know when and if for sure it will happen. And I've not heard about the second issue about incarcerated individuals.
Next slide, please. And just a final note from me. Again, I want to highlight that the advance payments are still temporary in nature. They only apply this year. Will a new version of child tax credit continue? Possibly. I think probably in some form. I mean, it's received rave reviews. The Urban Institute concluded that a permanent expansion reduced child poverty by 5.9 percentage points, which equals 4.3 million children, and an overall decrease in child poverty by 40%. So there really does seem to be a lot of movement. I know Nina Olson's group is pushing as well to make these changes permanent. There are senators, I know Mitt Romney, Sharon Brown from Ohio, I believe also Marco Rubio in Florida have shown a willingness to extend this child tax credit. However, it was passed, and not to get into too much politics, the extension was passed in a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, not the $1 billion one that passed the Senate with support from both parties. So it's going to be curious to see if it will be extended. If it is, the Senate bill extends it until 2025. So we're hoping that it extends. I think it will because it's been a very good program. I haven't seen too many people say negative things about it, and the IRS has done a wonderful job in getting the money out to the people who need it. So like I said, it is temporary in nature right now, but we do expect it, or at least I expect it to be extended. Next slide.
Before we move on, we have a couple of questions. Do foster children meet the relationship test?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Christine, do you know?
Yeah, they do. I just put it in the chat. But you have to be placed with the taxpayer by a court or a placement agency. The issue with foster children is usually the residence test, and you still have to have lived with the child for over 6 months of the year. So we do see disputes with children who were placed with somebody else after July 1st, most often. But yes, in terms of relationship test, foster children count as qualified children for the child tax credit.
And then there was a question about these advanced payments. Are they considered when the IRS is looking at a collection potential for maybe something like an offer and compromise or currently not collectible? Are they seen as available money?
So in relation to current non-collectible status, they should not be used. And I'll say they're not to be used also in an offer and compromise situation, but take into consideration that the offer in compromise, someone who has this child tax credit is getting $3,600 or $3,000. It may not make sense if they're receiving these credits to conduct an offer in compromise, because the offer in compromise program most likely takes about 2 years worth of tax refunds. So if the child tax credit is expanded, someone has 2 children, you're looking at $12,000, $13,000 potentially that can be used to pay down their tax debt. An offer in compromise just might not work.
And then Kate will lead us through some issues that may lead to a delay, and then also let us know when practitioners can go to the Taxpayer Advocate Service for help. Next slide, please.
So getting the portals and the payments issued has been a ongoing process with lots of moving parts. So one of the problems I'm having is that we can't share details until we have things finalized. So for instance, we know in July there was a glitch related to taxpayers who had ITINs who were eligible but did not receive the July payment. And we know as of now that the glitch has been paid or fixed, and the taxpayers will be receiving 2 payments in August that will make them whole for July. But I can't tell you how that payment was calculated. And I also can't say if that process will be used going forward for other payments to make taxpayers whole. But it's just an example of how things are changing every day. Also on Friday, it was announced that the ability for a taxpayer to update their mailing address on the portal is now available, and that's great news. Before that, it had been determined it was maybe later in the summer and then later in the year. So as of now, the only things left on the portal to be updated are things that affect the amount of the child tax credit. So things like your marital status, how many children you have, your income, things like that. One issue I wanted to talk about was identity verification. If you're trying to help your client if they're having problems, one tool you can use is, well, first I should step back. There are 2 ways to verify their identity. They can either use the existing IRS account that they have, or they can use ID.me through the portal. And if they have problems using the ID.me portal, the first thing they can do is there's a help program through the program itself through ID.me. If you're not able to get help through that, then you can call the number that on the letter that the taxpayer received. And when you speak to the live assister, they should be able to help you. But in this case, if the live assister can't help you, being forwarded to a taxpayer assistance center, a TAC, is also an option. And that's the primary way that the TAC would be able to help with advanced child tax payments, is for identity verification. Then the other issue is what's happening to the cases where a return is not being processed, a 2020 return. So this could happen when you have EIP problems or RRC that needs to be manually reviewed. It also can happen in cases where the taxpayer is, for instance, in an audit or is a victim of identity theft, anything that causes the account on the IRS side to kind of get a flag on it so it's not processed. The advanced child tax payment is not going to go out until the underlying problem is cured or until the manual review is done. And there's nothing that we can do to speed the process up except for the IRS to work the cases. TAS does not take standalone advanced child tax problems if it's related to the portal. So we can't help a taxpayer with identity verification or any of the processes to unenroll or to add a child. But we can help if for instance, if the taxpayer has an audit and they need us to help them work through that audit. And then by fixing the audit problem, the advanced child tax credit can then go out. So that would be where TAS can help. I just wanted to give one example. So if your account is held up for like April, May, and June, but then the IRS fixes the problem in the case in July, then the August payment will go out and you will be made whole with the July payment. But that's the part that I'm not sure how it's happening. I'm not sure how the July payments will be given to the taxpayers. And I know it's horrible to say, but if in a worst case scenario, the taxpayer will get their money when they reconcile in 2021. But I know that right now taxpayers need the money. So I just don't know how the IRS is getting the money out to the taxpayers. Then for late filed returns, the IRS is going to base the payment on the 2019 or 2020 return. So if you filed a late return and you know you're not eligible, I would suggest that the taxpayer unenroll, even if the return hasn't processed yet. And then for duplicate returns, this is also an interesting topic. If two taxpayers claimed the child in 2020, or if there are divorced parents that share the child, the claiming of the child, the taxpayer who doesn't qualify should unenroll, but we're not sure what will happen if they don't. And the second parent won't be able to get the credit until they can add their qualifying child in the portal, which is not possible at this point. But in the end, in 2021, if the second taxpayer isn't made whole through back payments, they'll be able to claim it in 2021. And the first parent who wasn't eligible will either have to pay or have a smaller refund in 2021. I think that's all I have for quick topics. Does anybody have any questions?
Kate, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I wonder if you would be able to speak to. You did mention that in terms of the amount of payments that people are getting, that it's not entirely clear if people didn't get a payment in July, how much they'll get going forward. There was an August 13th news release that was a little bit confusing, but it seems to indicate that perhaps the amount of monthly payment would be higher for folks who didn't get started until later. But anything else that you want to comment on that? That's a comment in the Q&A about the back pay of advance payments.
I'm really sorry, but I can't comment on the back pay. I'm not sure how they're doing it, except for just the ITIN. I know there will be 2 payments in August, and I believe the second one came out on the 19th. But I think the first one was like 1/5, and the second one was going to make the whole July payment.
Thanks. I'll just put that news release in the chat. I think that's all the information that we have right now. And then, Kate, I thought you might also be able to address Nancy Ryan's question, perhaps not, about whether the National Taxpayer Advocate is advocating for the IRS to use its discretion not to offset the recovery rebate credit next year.
Well, there will be a blog coming out at some point, and I believe one of the recommendations is to not offset, but until it's published, I can't say yes or no, but I believe that's where it's headed.
Great, thank you. I
Um,
think we can move on to the next slide. Great. So Kate touched on some of this, but a couple of other things to mention in terms of challenges that we're seeing from non-filers. So in order to get in line currently to get advanced child tax credit payments, you need a 2020 or 2019 return on file. And so as Kate mentioned, a lot of folks are being frustrated with delays in return processing or having trouble getting that return on file, and that causes them not to be getting these payments. I encourage everyone to go and look at the non-filer portal guide that has been put together by a coalition of folks, including Center on Budget and Policy. It has screenshots that really take you through what it looks like. I think when we're sending clients to these tools, it's really helpful for us to be able to understand what it looks like and to really know whether we're sending somebody off to get stuck or whether we need to help them through it. There was a question entered about problems with the ID on the portal and getting driver's license accepted. I think, yes, it is pretty common for folks to get stuck trying to get through either the non-filer portal or the update portal verification. And as Kate mentioned, you should be able to tell the client to call the phone number on their letter from the IRS. This is a letter that says you may be eligible for advance payments, and to verify their identity and get in by phone instead of through some of these online tools. The IRS also issued FAQ clarifying that assisters can help people input their information if you have clients who are not tech savvy and need help getting through that portal. In terms of purely paper-based alternatives, there have been some questions recently about if you get partway through the non-filer portal and then you get stuck, can you print it out and send it in? So Revenue Procedure 2021-24 has kind of the procedures that the IRS has officially adopted for non-filers who need to get a 2020 tax return on file. And so if you have somebody who needs to file on paper to get that return on file, obviously it's not ideal because of the delay, but if that is your option, then I would follow those directions, and you'll want to write Revenue Procedure 2021-24 on the top of that Form 1040. So I don't know what the IRS would do if you get stuck in the portal and you just print out what the screen is showing and sending that in. I'm not sure that will get processed unless it's got that revenue procedure written on the top of it. So that's kind of the first challenge, is just getting that 2020 return on file. Identity verification, as Kate mentioned, you can call that number to do it by phone, and if that doesn't work, you can go to the Taxpayer Assistance Center with an appointment, as we all know, which is not that easy to get, and get that identity verified in person. All right, let's move on to the next slide. There were a couple of delays that are now resolved, which is a bright spot, I think, in our nice to give kudos to the IRS for fixing things that were glitches. People who had ITINs did not receive their first advanced child tax credit payment in July, but they are supposed to receive 2 payments in August to catch them up, as Kate mentioned and is on that news release that I put in the chat from August 13th. For folks who don't have a 2020 return on file, essentially because they need to go through the ITIN renewal or application process first, for those people, as we know, they're going to have to attach a paper return to their W-7 ITIN application and mail that in. So if they're a non-filer, they don't have an income to report on that return, it's important that they write Revenue Procedure 2021-21 on the return. I'm sorry, it might be 2021-24. Let me double check that. Make sure I give you the right revenue procedure. Yeah, it should be, sorry, that's a typo on the slide. It should be 2021-24 is the revenue procedure. You want to write that on the 2020 return to be sure that ITIN application will get processed. Since, as folks on the call probably know, the ITIN unit has been pretty restricted in the ITINs that they will process unless you can demonstrate that you have a filing requirement or some type of need to file the ITIN. And I will type that revenue procedure into the chat so you have it. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another guide for you. The link earlier in the slides was a guide to the non-filer portal for people who need to get a 2020 return on file. The next step, of course, is using the update portal. And so there are accessibility issues with that as well that we've been seeing. And there's a really helpful walkthrough with screenshots that can help you be prepared to work through it with a client. If they call you and they say they're stuck, well, you need to figure out which portal they're talking about. Is it the update portal or the non-filer portal? And then these screenshots should help you help them work through that. And identity verification, another hang up. Excuse me. We will put some of these links into the chat for you. Yes, thanks for asking that. So you've got identity verification that can come with filing a tax return, and you also have identity verification to create an account to use the update portal, right? And so again, as we mentioned before, you call the number on your IRS letter and try to walk through that. And if not, go to the Taxpayer Assistance Center. I think there was a report and a question on this in the chat about whether you can call up and get a TAC appointment without going through that attempted verification process. And there's at least one report of somebody being told that they can't set up a TAC appointment unless they try to verify online and by phone. And Kate, I don't know if you have any other information about that.
It only gets, the live assister will only forward you the option of going to a TAC if they can't resolve your problem over the phone.
So that may be, it's good to know in advance. It may be something that folks want to submit on SAMs if it causes delays or a hardship for your client. But that's important to know. Sorry, Kate, did you want to add something?
Oh no, I think entering the problems that you're running into on SAMs is helpful so that we have a better idea of what's going on.
Absolutely. irs.gov/SAMs is where you go to do that. Let's see, let's move on to the next slide. There's some portal issues. The functionality of the portal is a little bit different than a lot of people expect. And one of the ways that it's different is for married filing joint taxpayers. If your 2020 return is a married filing joint return and you want to make changes through the update portal to your advanced child tax credit payments, then really both spouses ideally would have portal accounts. And unlike with the stimulus payments, where the payment was treated by the IRS as indivisible, with the advanced child tax credit, the IRS is going to split payments if only one spouse goes into the portal and makes an update. So that's very helpful if you've recently separated, but it's also another barrier, another step to know about. If you're not separated from your spouse, you just want to update your joint bank account, for example. My understanding is that both spouses need to go in and enter those updates, whether that's the bank information or whether that's opting out of payments. Anything to add there, Kate?
No, just that both will have to go in and make the fix.
Next slide, please. So this slide has the list of information that can be updated currently on the portal based on the IRS news release from August 20th. You can update your bank account, your mailing address. You can switch from a paper check to direct deposit, which is useful. You can unenroll and you can look at your payment history. But according to the news release, and the next slide shows the items that the IRS is still hoping to roll out. Can we move to the next slide, please? Oh, great. So hopefully, quote unquote, later this year, you'll be able to add or remove children, change your marital status, or report changes in income. But for now, the money that people are getting is just based on the 2020 return on file, or 2019 if there's no 2020 return, and there's really nothing that we can do about it, nothing that our clients can do about it, except opt out. Briefly, just to touch on the issues of fraud, there's not really any quick answers. If somebody comes to you and says, my 2020 return is not on file, I'm not getting my child tax credits because I found out somebody claimed me as a dependent. We got a lot of these calls starting with the economic impact payment, people wrongly claiming children and disabled adults to try to get the stimulus payments for those folks. And that's now messing up people's access to the advanced child tax credit. So my understanding is that there has not been a new procedures adopted. So the answer of what to do in this situation is the same answer as it was 2 years ago when somebody would come to you with this problem. If you can't e-file a return because somebody has already claimed the SSN, then you need to file that return on paper. And it's a slow process. It can be a slow process to try to prove that you are actually entitled to that dependent or to claim your own exemption if you were the person wrongfully claimed. And until that process is completed and there is a return on file for you, there isn't a way to get the advanced child tax credit. As Kate said, if the dispute regarding the 2020 return identity theft or a simple dispute about who is entitled to claim a dependent, if the delay is causing a financial hardship, at some point, TAS might be able to open a case, but how long would you expect people, or what would you advise in that situation, Kate, as to when they should go to TAS versus, normally you have to sort of wait until the normal IRS timeframe before you go to TAS, but that's hard.
Exactly. I think it's just like any other case. It just happens to involve the advanced child tax credit. So I would wait as long as you normally wait for cases. I think it's 30 days beyond normal processing times, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So there's no
yeah.
expert. Yeah.
Right. So the procedures are what they were before. There's nothing different. Of course, what's different is that clients are losing out on this money, and some folks are very in hard situations and really need the money. But so I think we are often giving people answers that are not making them happy. And again, if we encounter systemic issues, we can put them on SAMs. If we have clients with financial hardship, we can go to TAS. And it's great that these issues get raised through the listserv. I know TAS also monitors the listserv, so we can raise issues that way also. One of the things I want to flag in terms of disputes, so there may not be a way to get your client advance payments this year if the 2020 return is tied up in a dispute. One of the problems that we had with the economic stimulus payment and people being told, well, you'll just be able to get the recovery rebate credit when you file next spring. That, I think, gave people a false impression of how easy it was going to be to get the recovery rebate credit. Because of the math error authority, what we're seeing is people whose information on their return doesn't match what the IRS has on file are getting math error notices. And then they're having to dispute those notices to assert their right to deficiency procedures. And there've been a few different emails on the ABA tax section's low income tax clinic listserv, basically saying the IRS told me there's no recourse. What can I do? Well, I mean, the IRS can't just change your return without following the legally required procedures. So I think, that's the first thing to know is that, yes, Congress gave the IRS math error authority to make these adjustments, but the taxpayer has a right to contest that within 60 days, and that adjustment needs to be reversed. If it doesn't happen within 60 days, then you want to think about, well, what are my next options? And if you're claiming a refund, you certainly always have the option to wait 6 months and then pursue a refund claim in federal district court. So this may be a little bit premature to talk about, but just because these issues are so prevalent right now with the recovery rebate credit, I just want to caution folks against advising people that it will be easy to get this money on their return next year, because there will be math error authority, and people will need to fight for the refunds that they're entitled to. And we need to be ready to help them fight for that. Next slide. I think we're going to move on to talking about opt-out procedures, and I'm going to pass it over to Professor Dooner. Sorry, Luce.
Oh, no, it's okay, Christine. We had a question about the ID.me tool. Can it be used in the context of trying to verify identity for a past tax return, for a 2019 tax return?
That I don't know if that's an option.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and Maria will take us through some issues that you may encounter with trying to whether someone should opt out of those payments.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about opting out right now. And before I talk about that, for those of you who are not familiar with the opt-out mechanism, the government purposely intended this to be an opt-out to try to reach as many people as possible. So as Frank alluded to, there's a great benefit for it to reach a lot of people that are getting these advance payments, but could be also some considerations on when you should be opting out. So one of them I put up in here is financial behavior. This is probably the easiest one, just when someone wanted to get a large refund at the end of the year and didn't get that. The more complicated ones are if the person is self-employed and they are supposed to be making estimated tax payments, and they base these payments on the prior year's return that had taken into account the child tax credit. They may be a client that you might want to speak to about potentially opting out, or at least putting the advance funds aside, because they could potentially have more of a liability than expected next year. Other people are perhaps on the flip side of the people that like to get these huge refunds. They purposely time their payments throughout the year based on the prior year tax return. You know, they might not want to pay more than they have to and have a big refund. So some of these people might have lower withholdings already due to allowances. They might have interest income or other taxable income that they've already accounted for the child tax credit on the prior year return. And though that was a smaller credit and they could potentially be entitled to an additional one, it's just still something to keep in mind. So for this slide, this is more tax behavior, financial behavior. If we go to the next slide, this is more of potentially causing an excess credit. And this is just simply based on the fact that for the government to distribute the advance credits, they're basing it on dated information. So 2021 may just not be indicative of what 2019 and 2020 looked like. So one thing to be just mindful of, if there is an increase in income or change in filing status, that could potentially reduce the credit that the person was entitled to. The other major item is a decrease in dependent. And since this credit is based on having a dependent, that's really important in terms of if someone loses a dependent, they could have an excess credit. And we're going to talk a little bit more again about the safe harbor provision, but that is super important in terms of whether the person will have to pay the credit back. And then there's just divorced and separated parents. So if there's particularly divorce decrees where they alternate dependents year by year, that model is really just not conducive to how this credit is being rolled out right now. So that is something where if you encounter clients that are divorced or separated, they might want to think about maybe opting out for now. They could potentially be eligible for the safe harbor provision and they won't have to worry about that. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the income phase out here. So I'm going to go quickly through the next 3 slides, but just to visualize this, someone that is a single taxpayer that has income that's less than $75,000 is going to get a $3,600 credit, full child tax credit, if the child's under the age of 6. Now, for every $1,000 that their modified adjusted gross income goes up, the credit starts reducing by 50. So 50 goes into 1,600 about 32 times. So about $32,000 later, they are out of that additional credit. And then it just plateaus because we still have the pre-existing TCJ Act where people get the $2,000 credit. So a lot of people will still get that. And then it's going to go and quickly phase out again once they hit 200,000. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a head of household, very similar, but just different income phase out. So it's $112,500. They'll get $3,600 if they're at that amount or below. And then again, $32,000 later, the additional $1,600 is gone. And then it phases, it plateaus at 2,000, and then it quickly goes down once they hit 200,000. And then we can just go to the final slide on the graph. So with this slide, same thing, except it's 150. This is for married, filing joint. And they'll get the $3,600 per child. And then it's going to phase out the additional 1,600 at 182. It'll start to plateau till 400, then it goes down to 440. So a couple of things, just looking at these graphics, I just want to mention to everyone is that we shouldn't forget that there's still this $2,000 credit that most people are going to be entitled to. If you look at the graph here, a lot of people that are married filing joint make under 400,000 will get this credit. So this credit is going to a lot of people. So in terms of when this group of people, if they're not losing a dependent and they're just experiencing an increase in income or change in filing status, then really the impact is just going to be that they got more of their credit upfront and they're going to get less of their credit on the tax return. And so that's the vulnerability here, is just them being informed of that. And then of course you have people that, if you look at the chart, they make over 400,000 and it's going to quickly go down. And if they were in maybe a lower income for the prior 2 years and they got the credit and now they are not entitled to the credit at all, they will have to pay it back. And I know that we'd hope that people that do have that income could pay it back, but there's a lot of people that are high income earners do sometimes have financial problems, as we know. So it's just something that you should probably advise your client on if they had a big flux in income and they might have to actually pay this back. So we can go to the next slide. Okay. So when there's a decrease in the dependent, this is actually the vulnerability where someone could have to get an excess credit and have to pay it back. So this is where you have to be very careful. And the safe harbor is intended there to absorb this, particularly for people that are in a certain income range, because the government now knows, they have to take this additional step. If they didn't take it, they want to sort of cushion them from having to repay this back. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I don't need to reiterate this because I think Frank already covered this, but basically there's this $2,000 exclusion for excess credit. And basically the people that do get this exclusion will not have to repay back the excess credit. Those that are still entitled, that should have been entitled to the credit, will get their credit at the end of the year. If it went to like another parent, they will still get the credit when they reconcile, even though the other parent is getting the safe harbor. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, and again, Frank pretty much covered this, but these are the thresholds here. So I just wanted to put a couple of examples so people kind of know what the calculation is going to look like. But potentially the formula right now is if there's a head of household taxpayer and they have reached $100,000 in modified adjusted gross income, it's the excess over 50,000. So that's $50,000 over 50,000. They're going to see 100% reduction. So essentially you just want to take the excess over 50,000, divide it by the base of whatever the applicable threshold is. And that's going to give you the percentage that's going to be reducing the $2,000 safe harbor. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a visual as well, but basically you can see in this chart that, oh, I'm so sorry. So you can basically see in this chart that there's a phase out once it hits 2,000, well, a 2,000 safe harbor, and then once the person has 50,000 in income and it's going down to 100,000, they will not get the safe harbor once the head of household taxpayer reaches 100,000. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is for single taxpayers, very similar to the first one, except the threshold is 40,000. It's going to be totally gone when they hit 80,000. So this is kind of what the chart looks like for the reduction of the safe harbor. And then you can go to the next slide. Okay, so now here are some examples. So if there is a single taxpayer that has received $1,800 in advance credit for a 4-year-old because they're under 6 years old, but now they got that credit, but their ex-wife is claiming the credit or is really entitled to it for 2021, and their modified gross income is 35,000, will they have to pay this back? So the answer is they will not have to pay this back because the safe harbor is fully available to them. There's no excess. If anything, they're below the 40,000, so it's going to be 0% instead of reducing the safe harbor. So basically, the $2,000 will completely offset the $1,800 that they got as an advance payment. And just to address Amid's comment that was in the chat earlier, basically, they're not going to have to repay it, but when they file the return, they're not going to get anything more. It's not like they got 2,000 minus 1,800 and they're going to get another $200. So that's, how to think about this particular example. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so example 2 is there's a single taxpayer who received 1,800 advance credit for a 4-year-old dependent. However, now the dependent's being claimed by an ex-wife. The taxpayer has a modified adjusted gross income of 70,000. So now we're dealing with a taxpayer that is within that phase out zone. So basically how you would handle this is the safe harbor of 2,000 is reduced by 75% because the single taxpayer, the applicable threshold was 40,000. They earn 70,000. 30 over 40 is 75%. So they are only going to be able to get 500 of the safe harbor. So they receive the $1,800 in advance. They will have to pay back $1,300 of the credit. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, and then finally, you have a single taxpayer who has received 3,600 advance credit for 2 young dependents based on prior year return. However, 1 dependent is now being claimed by the ex-wife. The taxpayer has modified adjusted gross income of 40,000. Here, the safe harbor would normally be 2,000 here. However, the way that the law is written, the taxpayer is entitled to a full credit anyway of 3,600 because they're still entitled to 1 dependent. They already got 3,600 in advance. So when reconciliation happens on the return, the credit that they got is already going to be offset. They were just essentially paid it early. So the safe harbor is not going to even kick in here. So these are just examples of how this is working in terms of the safe harbor provision and the opt-out. And I don't know if anyone has any questions, but we can go and move on to the question panel.
There are lots of great questions in the chat.
Asked if someone's earlier in the talk, someone talked about the safe harbor only applying if the taxpayer fulfilled the principal place of abode requirement. So that's in the US for half the year. And the question is that correct?
Well, Marco, I can try to answer that question. I think the rules for US expats, they are entitled to the child tax credit if they're living abroad, but they aren't actually supposed to be getting the advance credit because they're limited by their fundability of the credit to $1,400. So there's a special provision for US expats. I would believe that in that case, the safe harbor wouldn't apply because they're not supposed to get the advance credit.
Correct. From what I understand, the safe harbor only applies to someone who's lived in the United States for the last 6 months, for at least 6 months, I'm sorry.
And then Maria, you were talking about when there's both parents are disputing over the payments. And the question is, the setup is once taxpayers can add dependents in the update portal, will they get the advanced payments even though the other parent is still getting the full advance payment?
So everyone else can weigh in on what they think. I highly doubt it. I think if they go and try to get the dependent, if someone else is getting the dependent is not opting out, the government is probably not going to be paying that. And it's probably going to have to get reconciled either through the return or a dispute's going to develop later.
Also, the IRS generally goes by whoever files first with the social security number. So I would assume whoever unfortunately filed first the social security number most likely is going to be getting the payments.
I also
Interesting.
have a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it'll be interesting to see because it's possible that two parents could get it, but we don't know what they're going to do with the portal.
Right, so everybody's guessing right now. We have questions about the tactics to use. So the question is, if a non-filer has two qualifying children, but knows one child was claimed in 2020 by the other parent, should they only list the child who has not been claimed on the portal to reduce delays? And then should they file the 2021 return? And as for this child tax credit for both children, looks like.
Yeah, Polly, I think that's a good question. And I mean, you're right that the 2020 return, you need to get the return on file for them to start getting any money at all. And so it could be a good tactic. I'm curious what other people think, but it could be a good tactic to just use the non-filer portal with the child who you know wasn't claimed, and then wait until next year to claim both children. Because otherwise you may not get no advance payments this year. And normally I tell people, I really discourage people from filing returns that are not fully accurate. But if you're a non-filer who's only filing 2020 to get advance payments, then that's much less of a concern. I don't think you're not going to be held to that. You're going to have the chance to file a 2021 return listing both children. But what do others think about Polly's suggestion?
Does make sense to get some of the payment now. Polly also posed another question about a tax filer. If they, about a taxpayer who filed a 2020 tax return, but used an expired I-10 and now has a valid social security number, isn't required to file a 2020 tax return. Should this taxpayer use the non-filer portal using their social security number that they recently received?
That's a good question. Would they have a filing responsibility otherwise?
It looks like for 2020, no, they're not required to file a tax return.
I guess the question is whether it would cause problems for you to have a 2020 return filed with an expired I-10 and another, because as Teresa mentioned in the chat, the non-filer portal creates a return, so it's also a 2020 return. But I don't know, Kate, if that would ever get matched up and cause a problem or not.
Oh, no. I'm not sure what to say. If you want, I can take the question and find an answer.
One of the questions I'm seeing in the chat, I don't know if anyone else on the panel has seen anything else that they'd like to address. I was curious about when someone is helping a taxpayer, and sometimes they have the letters they received from the IRS. Other times they don't exactly know what's going on, but they're trying to resolve it. What can you share about your experiences with everyone on this call about what they can do, where to start? Because normally would be a call to the IRS, but that's very hard, or a visit to the Taxpayer Assistance Center, and that's been very difficult right now as well.
I think I can try to answer this, but I think that, there's only so much when it comes to the delays and the returns, there's only so much really a practitioner can do. I know this summer at the summer clinic, we had a student that was able to accelerate and get the ID verification letter reissued, but he couldn't be the one to call up and verify for the taxpayer. So I think, these are kind of operational and staffing, I think, issues that have to be dealt with, at the IRS level to try to get things to go through faster.
Thanks. And
Yeah, I
then,
don't think there's a magic answer to that, unfortunately.
I know that throughout this talk, you have all mentioned turning in some complaints or things that practitioners are seeing through a SAMS. When should things be reported?
I think things should be reported on SAMS when it's an issue that's affecting a broad amount of taxpayers. So I think like this ITIN question is a good question because I don't even know where. I think I would post all problems that you're running into with the portal or these, like, so for instance, the ITIN issue that we found in July, I noticed a lot of SAM submissions based on that. So if you see an issue, you should post it so that we can, like, in the aggregate, look to see if there is an ongoing issue that's affecting a lot of people. And then if you this individual question about the SSN, I haven't seen any guidance on that. So that would be a good issue to put on SAMS. If that makes sense.
Any resources you want to share? I know there's some listed here on the PowerPoint slide or anything that practitioners should rely on.
Soon there will be, well, the IRS seems to be like the newswire that came out on Friday that announced that the portal would be expanded to include the mailing address changes. So the information from irs.gov is good, but also soon there should be coming out 3 blogs from the MTA on advanced child tax credit. So that would be another good resource.
The other thing in terms of resources from a question in the chat, there was a question about what's the difference between the IRS non-filer portal and like the Code for America portal that they're setting up. So that will be another resource that'll be live soon. And as we mentioned, the non-filer portal, it creates a 2020 tax return. So what the VITA sites, including Code for America sites, have been doing is just filing a simplified electronic tax return for people. So it accomplishes the same thing. It should be equally as fast. They're both creating 2020 tax returns and filing them electronically. It's, I think, the value of using the Code for America portal would be to get assistance if you have access to somebody who you can call or text to help you through that.
Are there any, oh, sorry, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, well, there was also a question, Zach asked a question a while back about timeframes, and the question was about timeframes. And I wasn't quite sure if the question was asking about entering information on the non-filer portal or on the CTC update portal, because the answer is very different. As Teresa mentioned in the chat, that we need to warn people that if they're using the non-filer portal or filing a 2020 return through Code for America, like the processing of that is not quick necessarily, especially if there's a recovery rebate claim. So that has to be looked at by hand. But if you mean how soon changes get implemented through the CTC update portal, well, that is much faster, and the IRS has published the deadlines by which you need to make changes for them to be effective the following month. So those are on the CTC FAQ page on the IRS.gov.
And what kind of issues do you see as the kinds of issues that taxpayers can handle themselves when trying to figure out whether to receive the payments or try to verify their identity?
I mean, I think that depends on the taxpayer. It's kind of hard to answer. And I know, a number of us on the call have raised the issue of representatives can't really verify somebody's identity for them. So it's not really possible for us to do it, for a taxpayer. So, and we can strategize and we can follow up and we can try to help people, but ultimately the ID verification has to be done by the taxpayer. I know, some folks, once somebody gets a TAC appointment, are going with them to make sure that it is done correctly when you get to the TAC. But on the phone call, the folks who are verifying identity by phone do not want you to be on the call, and some of them don't react very well if there's a representative on the call. They're suspicious of that. So for identity verification, yes, we can help people by telling them what to expect, by telling them what the steps are, but they might have to do it on their own largely. Other responses to that question?
I think that's a good one, and trying to make sure they have everything they need once they're either logging into the different portals or trying to use the tools that are out there, like ID.me. And then there's a question about, can the panelists share a sense of their level of clients that are having child tax credit issues? I'm not sure if that means like the number of people having issues or.
I mean, for us, it's mostly people calling to say that when they tried to file their 2020 return, they realized that either their child or themselves had been claimed as a dependent by somebody else. But others have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think similarly, Christine, it's that, or it's potentially they have a delay in their 2020 return that's causing a delay maybe in the child tax credit because the 2020 return hasn't been processed. So that's just, I think, another thing that we've been seeing.
There's a question here about being on the phone with a client who needs to deal with an ID issue. And they need a disability accommodation or language access to get through just that initial phase of getting help. An additional question about how the IRS verifies principal place of abode at where the child is living for more than half the year. How would the IRS be doing that?
I mean, the thing about taxes is that nobody verifies anything unless there's a dispute, right? So yes, they look at the address on the return and they have databases that they run each return by, but it's not quite the same as a front-end benefits application where you're providing, where everything might get verified. So I don't know, Kate, if you have any other thoughts on that. But and it's really interesting because these payments are for 2021, but they're all being based on the 2020 return so far. And as we've seen, the information you can update is very limited. So it will be really interesting to see how the system is designed when the IRS rolls out the ability to update the identity of your children, for example, because we don't know what they're going to do and what level of verification they're going to require those updates to go through. In terms of the point about disability accommodations and language access, IRS phone assisters are supposed to have access to Language Line to get language access for people. I think it doesn't always work that well. They don't always offer. And yes, you know, as a legal matter, the government should be giving disability accommodations to folks. I think that that concept is unfamiliar to many of the folks staffing the call lines, though. So as a practical matter, often the client has to fail the phone verification to get an in-person appointment. But yes, I mean, I think strategizing about how to help people through this who need disability accommodations would be a great conversation to continue.
And is there any sense of when the portal to add a dependent born in 2021 will be available?
No, it's interesting because earlier in August, they were saying later this summer, maybe September, and now they're saying later this year. So I don't know what that means.
Polly brought up this issue. Is there a way to verify identity by mail if you have a government issued ID and your documents?
Not that I'm aware of. I think you have to, if you can't resolve it over the phone, I believe you have to go into attack.
Person. Throughout this talk, you guys have mentioned the listserv, the American Bar Association listserv. Would any of the panelists like to talk about how to get on that list and what's on there?
Sure. So the ABA tax section maintains listservs for its committees, and the listserv for the Pro Bono and Tax Clinics Committee is open to the public. So unlike the other committee listservs, you don't have to be a member of the ABA to join, but you do need to have an online account with the ABA, and then you can sign up for the Pro Bono and Tax Clinics Connected Community, it's called, and I can put that link in the chat.
Any other tips you guys want to share, either about helping someone or examples, something you've seen, something unexpected?
I guess just to follow up on the comments about folks who are incarcerated, I don't see anything in the statute that would really say anything about folks who are incarcerated in terms of the child tax credit. Of course, you have to meet the requirements of having a qualifying child, and most of us on this call, I think, know that the residency test can be complicated by temporary absences, which can sometimes include incarceration. So I think the doubt about folks who are incarcerated is, more about the practicalities of getting through the portal and getting the return filed and meeting the tests than it is anything in the law that would bar incarcerated folks from the child tax credit. So I just wanted to say I don't think there's a legal bar for incarcerated folks per se for getting this credit.
Thank you. Anything else anyone else wants to add?
There was a question in the chat about AGI and what folks should put for AGI when they're trying to get through the non-filer portal. So it sounds like Gina has had some success with clients putting $1. So what that is when you're going through the non-filer portal to create a 2020 return, one of the ways that you verify who you are is by putting the AGI from your last filed tax return. So I suppose $1 would be correct if the person did a non-filer return for the previous year, perhaps. for 2019 to get a stimulus payment last year. But okay, she means not the ID verification, not the non-filer portal. On the non-filer portal, I think generally people should put 0, but on the ID verification, I suppose that's a different question, and it could be looking for your most recent return on file, including 2020. Anybody else have thoughts on that issue? Yeah, and Teresa is saying in the chat that she agrees that folks should enter $1 if they used the non-filer portal in the past, and use 0 if they didn't file at all.
I think there was a presentation a couple of weeks ago with CBPP and Code for America that talked about how to navigate through the portal, and it said to use 0 for AGI.
Okay, don't see any more questions. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Keep a lookout for an upcoming webinar. It'll be September 14th. It'll be from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and it will be about the future of the child tax credit. I think the discussion will be about policy and legislative issues. So be on the lookout for that email. Thank you to our panelists for preparing everything today and answering all of our questions.